Welcome to NCBI's inaugural Advocacy Talks live event. So we're delighted to be able to share with you this new initiative. We'll be bringing you a discussion once a month, a live event once a month on the third Thursday at 3 p.m. on topics of relevance to people who are blind or have a vision impairment. Today, we're going to be talking about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with a Disability, persons with disabilities. A very exciting time in Ireland as Ireland makes its first report. As this is a live webinar, we won't be exchanging information with you directly during the meeting, but you can, if you choose, to put in some questions that we'll ask during that time or at the end of the session. The session will last approximately 40 minutes. And we'll answer your questions then, or if appropriate, we'll ask the presenters to answer them during the meeting. We have three presenters for you today. We have June Tinsley, Head of Advocacy and Communications at NCBI. June's going to be introducing herself and telling you a little bit about what NCBI is doing in her space. We have, I'm going to get this wrong, I know. We have Jessica Mavwelen. I probably have pronounced Jessica's name wrong. Please welcome Jessica as NCBI's new policy officer. He'll tell you a little bit about the CRPD from a policy perspective. And we're also delighted to have Maeve Hennessy. Maeve Hennessy is a service user of NCBI, a trained advocate within the NCBI Advocacy Network. And Maeve has also been representing both herself and NCBI on some very high-level committees regarding people with a disability. So welcome everyone today. First, we might go over to you, June.
Thanks, Liz, and welcome everybody to this talk on the UNCRPD. I suppose just to introduce myself, I'm June Tinsley. I took over the reins of the Advocacy Department in December following Kevin Kelly's departure. So I have the joy of looking after the whole advocacy side of the NCBI house and also the communications side. And there's often an overlap between those two, which is great. But also in the role of communications, we need to kind of promote all our services, the retail side and fundraising, as well as advocacy. So it's kind of a bit of a bigger brief. But great to have you on board, and thanks so far for your participation in the different local advocacy networks that are happening across the country. It's great to have that engagement, and we want to mobilise more and more people who use our services so that their voice gets louder and louder, and as a result influences things happening, not just in your own locality, but also with a wider picture, so that the issues affecting people who are living with sight loss are more to the front centre when it comes to policy making, but also just even greater public awareness of the issues.
Hello.
So, hi Maeve, how are you? It's June here. We're just starting this chat here. So in connection with the UNCRPD, this is a kind of a landmark opportunity for Ireland to showcase how well it's performing. This convention was finally ratified by Ireland in March 2018, and it basically means that there's an obligation on the state to transpose and integrate all the key articles within the UN Convention into Irish law and into Irish services. And then as part of the reporting structure, they have to declare how well Ireland is faring, and UN committee will assess that and then give a kind of a critique on how it should continue to improve and areas that it's working well on. I suppose our obligation really is to assess how well they are doing from the lens of people who are blind and vision impaired. And we know that the government has kind of progressed a few strategies to promote the rights and inclusion of people with sight loss. Things like the Comprehensive Employment Strategy, the National Disability Inclusion Strategy. Both of those are kind of live, current documents and roadmaps for the government to follow on how to integrate more the articles of the UN Convention. But I suppose from a NCBI lens, we want to make sure that the reflection of the state's performance captures the needs of people who are blind and vision impaired. And we're doing that through a number of ways. This is one such way, and we want then to make sure that there's an awful echo on this. I hope people can hear me. Sorry, the other issues are ways we're going to do this is compile a submission on behalf of NCBI. We're working also with our advocates who are on the Disability Consultative Participation Network set up by the department and supporting them. We're also working with our colleagues in the NDA, National Disability Authority, and the Disability Federation of Ireland, who are all kind of collating different submissions to try and give strength and critique to the Ireland's state report. At the minute, Ireland has drafted a state report, and they're now looking for feedback on that state report, and the feedback is due on April 9th. And as I said, those different approaches that I mentioned is what NCBI will be doing to influence how we make sure that the issues affecting people with sight loss are named and clearly represented. There's also an opportunity for you guys to attend different consultation networks, and we can send out the details on that. They are starting on March 26th, I think. But I hope that gives a quick overview to you on what the UNCRPD process is, and to reinforce and encourage you to participate in the different ways that you can to make sure the voice and experiences of people who are blind and vision impaired are captured. But I'll hand over now to Jessica, who's just going to give us a quick overview of some of the key articles within the UN Convention that we believe are so important to make sure that we have a clear representation of the issues affecting people who are living with sight loss. So I'll hand over to Jessica. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks, June. So yeah, as June said, so I'm just going to give you guys a quick overview of the UNCRPD, and just to give you a little bit of background on myself. I only just joined the organisation in February, so I've taken over the role of policy and research. So I suppose my own background would have been in policy anyway, and I would have done a lot of work on the UNCRPD, so I would be familiar enough with it. So hopefully I can explain it in a way that actually makes sense to people today. So I suppose, look, for people who aren't aware of it, there is an awful lot of information in the UNCRPD, and it is difficult to get your head around. Like the convention itself I think it was ratified by the UN in the mid-2000s, but it was only ratified by Ireland in, was it late 2017, early 2018? So we were about 10 years behind in actually bringing it into effect. And look, I know many of you will have heard about the optional protocol as well, which wasn't ratified. So I suppose the easiest way to explain that really would be that while these guidelines and directives have come in, the optional protocol would have given them a bit more strength in terms of, I suppose, enforcing them within Irish law. But look, it's something that different sectors are working on, and you'd be hoping that would be ratified in the next few years. So I suppose, look, the convention itself, it sets out various directives and guidelines. They're broken down into articles, and they cross every single aspect of our lives. I mean, they're articles, usual articles you would see in UN policies, such as, the right not to be tortured, or, the right to be deserving of justice and to be treated equally by the legal system. But I suppose then the thing with the Convention on People with Disabilities, the difference with that really is that it goes more in depth to things like, mobility across the country, across even your city, across your locality. It goes in depth to the point where it deals with, your interaction with your favorite hobbies, with sports, with cultural activities, your interaction with the health service, your right to education and training. It covers a lot of areas. Now, having said that, the convention itself would have brought in a lot of rights and directives on rights that are already present in the Irish system. I suppose, you know, look, we have the Disability Act of 2005. There's provision, I know myself, in the Education Act of 98, which would allow for things like special needs assistance that some of us who would have been in school in the 90s and the early 2000s would be familiar with. And, you know, the various health acts and anti-discrimination law that exist. So I suppose in a way it's complementary to that as well. But as I said, you know, the convention itself goes through a number of different aspects of our lives. Now, I think there's about 34 articles with it. I won't go through each of them because it'll probably take up the entire 40 minutes to an hour that we have. But look, it's very extensive, and I mean, I know myself, even from the few times that I've went through it, and you know, the NCBI is currently working on a submission to the state draft report on what they think they have achieved. We have, you know, there's nothing that hasn't been thought about in the document, so it is very comprehensive, and it really is a to-do list, as I like to look at it. I suppose the main intention of the document is to make sure that we're all working on a level playing field to everyone else. It's not about making things, you know, easier for us to achieve. It's just making sure that we have the same achievements, and we don't have the barriers to these achievements that others without sight loss don't have. So I suppose really the other important thing this document does is it does give us the right to ask for the power to make changes, either in our society at a community level, at a local government level, at a national level. And, you know, I suppose all of this is superseded by the EU as well. So, you know, if you wanted to push it to an EU level, you could. I suppose what I really want to do today is just give you guys an overview of, you know, how you can interact with the convention. And I mean, there are an awful lot of ways to interact with it. And I'll give you an overview of where we are in terms of what the NCBI is currently dealing with the submission that the state has made. What I usually do when it comes to the UN Convention is, because there are so many articles, it's a good idea to just have a read through it yourself and see if there are particular articles that speak to you. I know for me, the particular article that speaks to me is the education and the children with disabilities article. And I do find those quite important. So I suppose, you know, have a look at the article that you are most passionate about. And, you know, just think about how it can affect your life. What are the legislative impacts that are either supporting it or hindering it? You know, it can be as easy as chatting to your friends or family about your thoughts on it, about how you feel that something could be improved. A lot of us, you know, I suppose we're so used to living with a sight impairment or sight loss that we often forget an awful lot of things about living with it than we can ever remember or explain to anyone else. Another way that you can influence the I suppose, you know, how the convention is implemented within the country is, you know, lobbying your local politician. It could so happen that a minister is in your constituency. It could be your local TD. It could be your local councillor when it comes to something like, you know, the article that covers transport. Transport should be as accessible to people with sight loss as it is to people who are wheelchair users or, you know, people with physical impairments. If any of you are involved in what we would call pressure groups, you know, that are particularly focused on one part of the convention. I know there's a group in Kilkenny, just, you know, for instance, they're specifically concerned with the article that deals with the rights of children with disabilities, or I suppose in our case, because we're looking at it from a sight loss perspective, these children, you know, they're concerned with these children and how they can interact with the health services to get early interventions to allow them to flourish in the education system, the same as a child without these impairments would. So I suppose that's another way that you can get involved. I know what I've seen an awful lot of advocates do as well is doing things like writing open editorials or just writing letters to the editor, to their local newspapers, their national newspapers, even blog posts on you know, on the websites for different pressure groups. I know some of the unions that represent teachers as well are very open to hearing from advocates. Even just something as small as you know, sharing the information on the convention on social media, like that, you know, that continues. I suppose that it starts and it continues a discussion that people don't always have, and it is important to talk about it, because you know, the more that you share the information, the more you become comfortable with it yourself, is the more that you can influence the change. And I suppose, you know, that's something that we would work on with yourselves in the advocacy network, that you know, the more voices that we have putting pressure on changes from the convention to be implemented, whether it's with politicians, civil servants, they're more incentivized to change the more of us that stand up and have our voices heard. So I suppose, look, in terms of what the NCBI is currently working on with the articles, the government the government published its draft report shortly before Christmas, and they are open to submissions at the moment. So we will be making a submission. The submissions are due in by the 9th of April, but I'd encourage, you know, anyone within the advocacy network, if it's something that you'd like to do, you know, and you feel that you'd like to do it on your own, but you'd like a bit of guidance on it, you know, do come to us and contact us. Because the draft submission that was made by the state, a lot of it is legislation heavy. Some of it doesn't always focus on people with vision impairments. I know particularly one of the articles around transport is one of the articles on transport doesn't include things like, you know, when you're in bus terminals or train stations, that, you know, screens that are announcing departures and arrivals would be at eye level or would have an increased magnification on them for people who might be affected by sight loss. You know, that's one thing that unfortunately the state has missed out on. But I suppose in terms of what the NCBI is working on, our submission is focusing mainly on the articles surrounding children with disabilities, which is Article 7, Article 8, which would be awareness raising. And I suppose awareness raising is again where yourselves in the local advocacy networks do come in. It wouldn't only be awareness raising at a local level, but I suppose even at a national level to let people know that, you know, this is what the NCBI is here to do. These are the services we provide. And I suppose that in itself also creates a societal change, that people get more used to that people would get more used to, you know, hearing the name, hearing advocates speak out in their own behalf. We're then dealing with Article 9, as I said, which is accessibility, and a lot of that would be around the built environment. It would be around public transport networks. And I know some of you are involved in the public participation networks as well, who do also feed into local groups in terms of the accessibility of, you know, transport in your own areas. So I suppose one article that we may not have realised that we would be feeding into, but that we are giving a lot of feedback on, is Article 11, which is in relation to situations of risk or humanitarian emergency. I mean, to me, that would have been before 2020. A humanitarian emergency would have been something like Hurricane Katrina. I suppose now we're staring down the barrel of COVID, and we have been for the last year, and that has impacted the equity of access that people with sight loss are facing in terms of, you know, having contact with their doctors if they've had procedures that were delayed or cancelled due to, you know, obviously overcrowding of hospitals due to COVID. So that has been something that's been challenging for us to work on, but it's a really interesting article for us to give a submission on. Article 12 then would be the equal recognition before the law. I suppose one thing just to highlight to yourselves that we are working on in this context, would really be to do with financial institutions and how equitable access is for people with sight loss. I mean, some of us know from using various banking apps that they're not all equally accessible. But that is something we're getting a lot of traction on. I suppose then, you know, things like Article 19, which is to do with living independently. And that wouldn't just be a case of, you know, living on your own. It would be a case of, you know, that you have the correct supports and you have the right to live independently within your community the same way that other people in your community do. Article 21 is then dealing with freedom of expression. And I suppose that would feed into political participation as well. You know, just I suppose, you know, something as simple as voting. You know, we do have the templates now that are available. I know they were available at the last set of elections for the European and local elections, and the general election as well, that people with sight loss can go in and can make their mark on the ballot paper independent of anyone having to help them. And that is really important. You know, that was something that, you know, there wasn't a lot of movement on until the UN Convention was ratified by the state. And I suppose then the articles after that would just be the usual, you know, education and health, where we would just be ensuring that, you know, people with sight loss continue to be able to avail of reasonable accommodations in terms of their education, in terms of state exams, and even accessing training, whether it's in, you know, a post-leaving cert situation or whether it's training through Intrio or the Department of Social Protection. We're also working on the article in relation to employment. So I suppose, look, many of us, whether it's a case that you're self-employed, whether you're part-time employed or whether you're full-time employed, you know, there are reasonable accommodations available there, and we, I suppose, just want to emphasise that more needs to be done to encourage people with vision impairment to be able to really get into the day-to-day, I suppose, of remote working as it is at the moment, but that, you know, that we do have legislative rights to do so within the Irish statute books. And then I suppose, look, the other articles then as well would be, you know, things like adequate standards of living and social protection, and participation in, like I said, you know, recreational parts of your life, like your hobbies, your sports, and you know, cultural and heritage events, or, you know, even visits to museums, things like that. So, you know, it does encompass every single part of your day-to-day life. And yeah, that's kind of all I have to say on it, really. I just welcome any questions on it at the end.
Hi, Jessica, that's fantastic. That information is wonderful. Do have a question for you here, there, if I might ask. Can everyone hear me? Brendan's from Brendan, and Brendan asks, thanks for a really helpful session. What's your sense of which areas of the CRPD are hotspots when it comes to the sight loss community? For example, do we have any way of knowing how we compare to our EU cousins or the UK?
Okay, so that's actually a really interesting question, I suppose. Look, that is something that we are continuing to work on while we're putting the submission together. We would have links with the European Blind Union, so they would produce an awful lot of statistics and research around different countries. We're currently working on the employment article, and, you know, Ireland is one of the worst reporters in terms of people with sight loss who are working as self-employed people, you know, so we are able to keep a check on it. The figures are difficult to get, but they are there. And I suppose in terms of hotspots, my own personal opinion would be the children with disabilities article would be the main hotspot, because I suppose, you know, only when you can get an early intervention to assist a child and, you know, attain a diagnosis for later on using to gain reasonable accommodations when it comes to school or exams. That would be my kind of main priority there, but I suppose health and the humanitarian emergency articles would be quite important as well. in terms of health, I suppose, look, health and humanitarian are feeding into each other at the moment because of the COVID-19 issue. People who would have, you know, who would have regular interaction, let's say, with their ophthalmologist, that, you know, they may not have had that this year or last year because of the COVID-19 restrictions. Again, even something as small as, you know, even doing your own shopping. Some people with sight loss find it very difficult to adhere to social distancing measures. I'm partially sighted myself, and it is something I struggle with because I don't have any depth perception, so I don't know how close I'm standing to someone. So I would say that they would probably be the main hotspots. Like you can see yourselves, I suppose, really, that like they do touch on each part of your life. I suppose it's a very personal it's a very personal convention as well because of that, because, you know, sport might be a lot more important to someone else's life than, you know, health might be in someone else's. It's a bit of a mixed bag that way, but I suppose any of you can pick out your own article or several articles that I suppose you would feel particularly passionate about.
Wonderful.
Can I just jump in there, Liz, for a second? Jessica, to be fair, has touched on a lot of the issues that would be hotspots, as Brendan rightly says. And I suppose for me, I would like to reinforce the fact that ophthalmic care is, the waiting list associated with ophthalmic care is probably, I think it's the 4th longest in the country, with some individuals waiting over 18 months to get seen by a consultant. So that certainly is a hotspot, because regardless of what age you are, as with many conditions, the longer you're without treatment or diagnosis, conditions can deteriorate, and worst case scenario can lead to unnecessary blindness. So we certainly want to make sure that is addressed. Comparatively, Ireland has, it records that we have 24% of people who are blind to vision impaired in employment, but by European standards, that's quite low. So I think there is an area for to improve upon in that. I can see there as well, some people are asking how can we access the articles, and I think Liz can circulate to anybody who's listening to this the state draft report as it is presently, and which of course names all the articles, and the different how to register for the consultation process that the department has just released. It goes live tomorrow. So as I said, people have the choice to put in written submissions or can attend some of these consultations. There will be on first come, first served basis. So if you are keen to sign up to the registration, feel free to do that tomorrow with the department. We can send out the links to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, June. We might move on to our third speaker, Maeve Hennessy. And we've just, as I described earlier, Maeve is a service user advocate in our local advocacy network and is currently representing both herself and NCBI on some very high level committees regarding people with disabilities. So we look forward to hearing about your journey, Maeve.
Maeve just seems to be muted at the moment. I don't know if you can fix that there, Maeve. I might have to dial her in again if she can't. So if you just bear with me for a second.
Okay, thanks, Aoife. Can I just mention there that Jessica and June has brought up some really important issues about people, getting together and speaking out on some of these issues. I think the CRPD certainly takes into account so many issues to do with people with disabilities around the world. And I like Jessica's idea that you go to the one that actually you feel passionate about and do some research on that. But certainly it's an invitation also to join NCBI's a national advocacy network and our local advocacy groups that we're setting up around the country. We currently have 4 and looking to set up more. So this is an opportunity for you to do exactly what Jessica's suggesting there, of getting with like-minded people and talking about the issues and the barriers to your participation and engagement in your local area, and get involved in some local and national campaigns with NCBI. So we really encourage you to, you don't need to be an expert on advocacy, just come along and join the conversation about how we can improve the participation of people with vision impairment and other disabilities in our societies around Ireland.
Great, Liz. We should have Maeve here with us
Right.
now.
Hello, welcome, Maeve. Good to see you again.
Hi, Liz. Hi, Eva. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself there for a moment. Well, I just say hi to everybody first. I suppose I was asked to call in today to just tell you a bit about the Disability Consultation and Participation Network. So it's I think it's part of the obligations of the UNCRPD that they have to set this network up, and the aim is really so that people with disabilities and disabled persons organisations would be involved in every step of any policy or law that affects us, which the kind of the main kind of thing that they kept pushing was the phrase was "nothing about us without us," essentially. So they just asked me to chat a bit about what we how I got on it. As Liz has been very kind there with her introduction, I got one of the advocacy emails saying that the position was open. I filled out the submission form, and I was lucky enough to be chosen. I suppose I'll talk a bit about how it's actually gone as a network. It's still very new, and it's only been set up, I think, since October, and I think it's funded until September. So there's plenty of time left to kind of get involved and reach out to it. As far as the consultations went, they went quite well. Unfortunately, there was a few communication issues. They'd missed the beginning of them, but I was able to attend the last three. And I guess I'll just start by telling you a bit about what the other members there, they were saying that I think a lot of us were expecting to actually get to speak to the other members of the network, and we were able to do that when we were consulting on the draft report directly, but there was no kind of a forum or something would have been better to have set up so that there could be a proper kind of participation. And that's really it. Does anybody actually have any like questions on what the DCPN is, the consultation network? Or
I think it would be really useful, Maeve, if you'd like to explain exactly why it's been formed, and if you can, please, and what it's like really as a person with a vision impairment being involved in that level of committee membership.
Right. Okay. So, as I said, it was set up essentially because the CRPD puts an obligation on the state to have disabled persons involved in the decision-making process at every level. And I suppose as a person with a visual impairment being involved in this, as you will know, the draft report, for those of you who've looked at it, it's very heavy going reading wise, and I know that's something that I do struggle with. So that's taken some time to get used to, but it's once you start, it's not half as complicated as it seems. If anybody was interested in looking into them, I'd start with the general principles, which is Article 3, and Article 4, which is the obligations that it places on the state. So that would let you, and that's really where I started. And I think after that, the one that I was passionate about really was Article 25, I believe it is, on health, because after my diagnosis, I very much slipped through the cracks and things, and it's acknowledged in the state report that there is a fragmentation there in our health service, and I think that's a key issue for me, because I think a lot of us with visual impairments, we don't know whether we're supposed to go to the HSE for the services or the NCBI for the service, and it's difficult sometimes to know where you'd even look for an OT or something like that. So that's an issue that I brought up in one consultation. And another issue that I raised was actually going back to something that Jess mentioned earlier, and that was the equal access to justice and recognition under the law, I think Article 12 and 13. As people who are blind or vision impaired are not allowed to sit on a jury. Now, there is a provision in the draft initial report from the state to rectify this for people who are deaf or hearing impaired, but not for people who are visually impaired. So that's been made a note of as well through the consultation network there. Oh, actually, I apologize for jumping around the place, but there was a question raised by Brendan earlier about where you'd get like similar information from other countries. Other countries have already ratified the report and have been sending in reports every 4 years to the UN. And if you could, I suppose, find a country with a similar health system and population size, you'd be able to get those reports. They're all available on the UN website. There's summaries there of the recommendations that they've made to other states. But I think essentially for ourselves, we just kind of have to wait until the government report goes in. The consultation for that is as the lads said, is the 9th of April. They stop taking submissions, and then the final report will be sent to the UN committee on June, I believe. So it's actually 1 year late at the moment, but nothing new there. Is there?
Oh, thanks, Niamh. Brendan has replied that makes sense. Thank you. So thank you for that answer. We have another question here that asks, are the meetings virtual? And what time do they take place? And what happens during the meeting? Jody has asked that question. I'm assuming Jody means the meetings that you're talking about, Niamh. So
yeah. Okay, so basically the meetings are virtual, obviously due to COVID. It's all done through Zoom. So we'll all have Zoomitis obviously at the end of this. But so essentially what happens is there's a facilitator. There's about, usually I think there's about 100 participants on the network. Again, this is all new information to myself as well, because we really only got proper information at the last one. But to just answer Jody's question, essentially you log on, they give you a very simplified version of, just in layman's terms, what the draft report says about the article that you're there to discuss. And then they split us up into 3 rooms. So there's like these virtual breakout rooms. So we would then spend an hour in kind of smaller groups of maybe about 10 to 12 people, all of different abilities and impairments and things. And those breakout rooms, they take minutes and we'd just discuss it. And then that would be for about an hour. We'd do an hour on each article, 2 articles at a time. And then those would return then everybody to the main room, and the main topics from each breakout room would be brought to everyone's attention. And that's really, it was a good format that they used, Jody, but there were a number of communication issues, and a lot of people, I think it came out there at the end, that a lot of people would have expected more engagement with other network members. Just to give you an example, the communication between network members, there was no form for that or anything, like to the point where I haven't even actually met the other visually impaired members on it. Now, that's probably a good thing, because it means that they were different ones to me. So that's, we've had good coverage there. Yeah, that's the that's how the meetings actually ran. There was about an hour and a half, 1 hour in a breakout room.
And then just to say that to elaborate a little bit on that question that Jodie has posed, the consultations that are happening in the next 3 weeks, they too are happening online. As I said, they're being run by the department specifically to have a stakeholder consultation. They're being run on the 26th of March, 30th of March, 1st of April, between 2 and 4 p.m. And each session is spanning different areas, from independent living to health, to transport, work, education, justice, children. And as I said, we'll send out the links to people for them to register. We'll also be putting it up on our social media channels from tomorrow. The registration is only open from tomorrow at 2 p.m. So we'll keep an eye on our social media platforms, which will have the appropriate links as well.
And another question from Jodie there. Thank you, Jodie. Is how can you get involved? So I guess it's been mentioned a few times. Jessica has mentioned there today about people sort of getting acquainted with the articles themselves. Maeve is an excellent example of getting involved in our local advocacy network and of coming along and having discussions about a lot of these issues, which we will be having this year. And through that, you can actually start learning how to advocate, how you can learn some advocacy skills. NCBI also has our advocacy department also has an online advocacy course where you can do some modules on introduction to advocacy and introduction to campaigning. So these are skills that everyone can learn, how to strategically approach these issues and what is the best way, either in your community or in the bigger picture like this with the UNCRPD, how you can actually advocate for change on smaller and larger scale. So we'll be delighted to hear from you. If you want to send us an email or give us a call and let us know. We'll link you up to the National Advocacy Network and our local advocacy network as well. Does that answer your question, Jodie? I hope. Aoife, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think that's we've all learned a lot there about it. That's really great. So if anyone has any further questions, you can email us on campaigns@ncbi.ie, and I'm happy to answer any questions or send out any further information that anyone wants there.
And as I said at the beginning, we'll be holding these advocacy talks on the third Thursday at 3 p.m. We'll also be sending you out some information where you can register for reminders and register for information that will come out, and we will send you information about those articles today. I've popped in a website, but we'll send you a little bit more information about NCBI's submissions, and we hope you can come and join us for many more of them in months to come. And if you have any ideas about anything you'd like to hear about, we're more than welcome to invite your opinions on any particular subjects you'd like to hear that interest people in the blindness and vision impaired community. So if there's no more questions today, let me have a little look and see if there's anything's come in there before we. No, that's pretty much how it is. So Aoife's given you the email address. We'd really like to gratefully thank our three guest speakers today for their insights into the convention. And it might look like a complicated document, but as Jessica said, it's set out in articles, and we invite you to come along and get involved in improving access and participation of people with a vision impairment and blindness in the community.